John, thanks so much for coming on. So great to catch up with you. And before we get started, I had to ask you a question. And I don't know if you remember this, so this is putting you on the spot a little bit, but it was 2005. We're playing in Laramie, Wyoming. In pregame, the wind was blowing so hard that the kickers were literally, the punters would punt the ball and it would go backwards. So if you remember this, and it was late in like third or fourth quarter, it was a crucial moment. We really needed to get a first down. And you call out to the line, you say 0-0, which means there's a blitz. So that adjusts the line protection. And, you've got to get the ball out quick. But do you remember what the offensive line heard in that moment?
I do not remember this. No.
Nope. So this was Jake Caressa telling me this. And what Jake heard was Reno, which means run right. So instead of pass blocking for the blitz, Jake thought you had audibled to a run. And so he run blocks, you drop back, the blitz comes.
Oh, I took off running
run
for
blocking.
Yes. You know what? I do remember this play now because, yes, somebody was in my face immediately and I took off running.
Yes, and you scramble for like 20 or 30 yards, pick up the first down. That play was huge. And the reason I think this is such a cool play is because so much in life is just kind of random. Annie Duke, she's a professional poker player. She says the outcome of your life is determined by two things: luck and the decisions you make. And in that moment, like, it was lucky. We prepared for it. We were a great team. It helped us clinch a bowl game berth. And I don't know if you're going to touch on any sort of randomness or luck today, but I just thought that was such a, when I think back to that season, that was such a cool memory I had. So as I thought about talking to you today for this podcast, I was thinking about a conversation you and I had about 10 years ago. Your playing career was just wrapping up and you were trying to decide what to do next. You and Barb didn't feel great about you going into coaching full time, but you were really interested in education and you wanted to get more education, but still wanted to be involved in football. And you had just started training quarterbacks. We fast forward almost a decade. You have two master's degrees. You're now training quarterbacks at 3D QB. It's just been so cool to see that progression. And as you think back on your time as a player and as a coach, quarterback trainer, I would love to hear if you have any simple, practical, underappreciated lessons that you would most want to pass along to your kids.
Yeah, I am going to piggyback off of, when you ask me that question, there are definitely a few things that I feel like are great lessons learned that I had to experience. I had to go through the experience to learn them just because of the way I was raised, my natural kind of like genetic wiring, the way my brain thinks. Those experiences taught me a lot. And it actually goes right with, what was the poker player's name again?
Annie Duke.
Yeah. What she said about a little bit of luck in the decisions that we make. To a degree, yes, the circumstances that we find ourselves in and the bounce of the ball, does a certain ball, does the guy that we throw the ball to, is it caught? Does he make a great play or does it not work out? Does the team that drafts us, do they have things set up for success, or structurally throughout their organization, is it a little bit of a mess, right? Like, we don't get to determine when we show up at an organization in football or who picks us. It's not like college where you get to go on all these visits and you say, all right, which one do I feel like is going to be set up for my success? It's not like that. In the NFL, you get drafted to a team, they pick you, and you have no say in it. And so as I've gone through my experience as a player and had to learn the things that I had to learn, and as I've helped quarterbacks, over these last, I think it has now been 10 years, and the things that I think I want to pass on to my kids, a lot of it comes down to these simple yet really tough outlooks of what's within your control, what's outside of your control. Do you understand that sometimes the things outside of your control do have a major impact? And how can you handle that, roll with that, still perform and try to give your very best, and yet let the chips fall where they may? I think that that's a difficult thing to do, probably just as it was a little bit difficult for me to explain all of the little intricacies and details that it encompasses. But the reality is, can you play to win? Can you still love the challenge when the things outside of your control may not be lined up to help you succeed? And that's a really difficult position for a quarterback to play in. And I am sure it's in all types of things in life. whether it's not just sports, but in business and even circumstantially in life in general. I think about the number of children that are born into very difficult circumstances, especially as you look outside of the United States, right? Like not everybody has the chips lined up for their success. Can you still prepare? Can you still work like crazy? Like a little quote that I tell my quarterbacks, my young quarterbacks, can you train, prepare, and give energy like it's the only thing that matters? But can you play like you have nothing to lose? That's so difficult to do because in this management of being able to truly understand what's outside of your control and what's within your control, that balance is so tough when you have to give so much energy. And so when I talk to my kids, I talk differently than how I was raised. My dad, who's a very extremely competitive person, very driven person, raised me to as much as you can try to control, your work ethic, like the things around you. Can you find a way to win despite the circumstances you find yourself in? I know that there's some heroic thing to that, right? Like sometimes movies are made about when circumstances aren't great, somebody rises to the occasion and finds a way to succeed despite their circumstances. But that's not always how life plays out. And sometimes some situations, there's so much that needs to be lined up for your success. Can you still go out there and be willing to not have it work out, yet play and love the challenge and go after it and be willing to then learn what you can from it? As I speak to my kids, so much of what I talk to my kids about is how we handle failure and how I want them to handle failure. It's not about trying to live this life or play these sports to avoid failure. It's chase it. It's go after it. It's compete. It's love the challenge. And then recognize that when you play this game, things don't work out. When you play this game, you have to have perspective that some things are out of your control. And then how do you handle it from then going forward? What can you learn and what makes you you from that point on?
I think that's so fascinating because you talk about your childhood, and I think back to my childhood as well, and especially in high school. I felt like the kind of prevailing mantra was like, you need to make it happen. Like if you want to win the state championship, you go win the state championship. And to a degree, yes, you have some control, but I feel like there's been a shift in the last 15, 20 years. And I think a lot has to do with sports psychologists and kind of this academic journey that you went through, getting a master's degree in sports psychology, where I now hear professional athletes, LeBron James, saying, I'm only going to worry about the things I can control, and I'm not going to worry about anything else. And there's a balance. Like, of course, if something's in our control, we don't want to say, we don't want to blame circumstance if it was in our control, but we have to be willing to acknowledge that some things are outside of our control.
Yeah, and that's really tough to do. I've been fortunate in my life to be able to be around a lot of really successful quarterbacks, guys that have had a lot of success at the NFL level. And a lot of our conversations have been on deeper levels of that very thing. What's within your control, what's outside of your control? How do you help a quarterback play his game regardless of the outcome? Because so much of nowadays, it's all based on outcomes, right? Like quarterbacks and head coaches are judged on outcomes. All of these metrics that they use to judge quarterbacks, like a lot of it's outcome based because it depends on receivers, tight ends, line, like it depends on all of these team factors, yet the quarterback himself is judged on it. I've been around a lot of really accurate quarterbacks that when we're out on the field and we watch them, they have a great ability to be accurate. And I've seen some other guys that maybe they're not quite as accurate, but then when you put those two guys on the teams that they're on, sometimes the guy that does not possess that higher level of accuracy on our field, he's winning football games and he's finding a way to make plays. And a lot of it comes down to the circumstances of the team. But, I'm definitely with you. It's funny you said that about the mantra of our era. My high school, we actually had a T-shirt that said, make it happen. It said, sometimes there's no next time. Sometimes there's no timeout. Sometimes there's no, I can't remember what the other thing was. And at the end of the shirt, it said, sometimes it's now or never. Make it happen. And that's how I lived my life. Make it happen. And when I went into the NFL and I landed on the Dolphins and we were, 0-9 or 0-10 when they named me the starter, I was able to say, all right, this first game, I'm just going to go out there and do my best. Whatever happens, happens. But then as you continue to lose, you don't want to keep losing. You want to make a win happen. And sometimes it's easy to try too hard. And 5 years later, I get an opportunity to be the starter for the Redskins. And that same feeling of like, man, like, I know this situation's not a great one, but I want to make it happen. and you start sometimes trying too hard. I love effort, and I love the drive that you have to give that type of effort. But there also needs to be this balancing between trying too hard to make it happen and realizing you just have to let go and play and let the chips fall where they may. And that's a really tough thing to do, but it's such a valuable lesson in life, because I feel like the anxieties, the stresses, the pressure, it allows us to handle those things so much better. Today's era, our quarterbacks are being paid $40 million. That's so much pressure game in and game out. So nowadays it's about, what can I do to depressurize this situation so that I can perform my best? And that's why there's great strategies nowadays, and they all go back to that, what's within your control.
Yeah, so interesting. So, of all the lessons, as you think back on your career, one of the most important lessons you want to pass along to your kids is worry about the things you can control. And it's the same message that you're communicating to the top NFL quarterbacks today. So, John, thanks so much for coming on. This is awesome to hear your perspective. When I think about you, just as a person, one thing I loved about you is I joined the team to walk on at BYU. You were already the established starter. And I learned real quick, you're the kind of guy that just treats everybody the same. Starter, walk on, water boy, equipment manager. I really appreciate that about you. Pulling for you. It's just been so awesome to watch your success as a football player, but then in this next phase. So thanks so much for coming on today, John.
You're welcome. Thank you, Nick, for your kind words, dude. I appreciate it, buddy.